Hey guys, what's up? So I'm here with a review of a dark fantasy horror film from 1979, and that is Phantasm. This is like a dark fantasy science fiction horror film. It's an independent film about a young boy and his friends facing off against a mysterious, almost alien-like grave robber known as the Tall Man, with who has a it has an arsenal of very strange and unique weapons. Uh, I've over all the years I've been a horror fan. This is the one film that I've always heard about as being one of the best horror films of the late '70s, or just one of the best in general. Definitely being one of the best like supernatural and or dark fantasy horror films, and it's one that I've always had a bit of interest in watching. So basically, I've heard nothing but hype for this film, and I hope that that doesn't ruin the film because honestly, I want to enjoy this film. So without further ado, let's check out Phantasm. Phantasm is one of those old films, one of those old horror films that really holds up well for it being nearly 40 years old. Much like the Evil Dead films, it's a low budget film that shows what you can do with little to no money and a lot of ingenuity and effort. And it also shows that a film doesn't have to be perfect to be held as a classic. That being said, the acting in the film is all around okay. I've seen better movies from low budget horror films, but I've also seen worse, a lot worse, from low budget horror. The writing is surprisingly solid, um, and it really uh, helps, and it's really good at mixing the horror and comedy very, very well. You know, it's not everybody can do that, but after seeing John Dies at the end, which the director of Phantasm also did, as well as one of his earliest and probably best known work, Phantasm, after seeing those two, I can kind of see how he has somewhat of a reputation in the horror comedy genre. Uh, Everything from a technical standpoint, lighting, camera work, is very, very solid, and it's surprising that it's very solid considering that most of the crew as well as the cast was made up of just amateurs. The film has some very very nice music, heavily inspired by the by Goblin's soundtrack for Suspiria, and you can definitely tell that this film has a very similar. It is obviously heavily inspired by Suspiria with some of the surreal moments. One of the big surreal moments, which I'm not going to spoil, but it uses the same kind of lighting that you see in Suspiria. The music is very similar. The whole idea of the adults not believing the teenagers or kids, that's used here as well, and it's used pretty well. The movie has a really surreal atmosphere, much like Suspiria. It's I haven't really seen a horror film like this surreal and that doesn't give as many answers as you want it to. That is, and I mean this in a good way. It's I haven't seen a surreal, answerless horror film this good in a while, and that's a really good thing. Uh, the characters in the film aren't super fleshed out, but I don't really care. Uh, but the mystery surrounding the main antagonist of the Tall Man, he brings a lot of interesting ideas and themes to the table, um, and his presence, even though he doesn't talk like at all, even though he only talks a few times throughout the entire film, his presence just makes his character all the more creepy and likable. Uh, the effects, while cheap, are done pretty well, and if there were anything that I had to complain about this film, it's the pacing is a tad bit off, but that's no big problem. And the fact that the main character Mike is not very likable. At least I didn't like him that much at all. He just felt kind of like a whiny clingy douchebag kid, and I don't like characters like that. Hopefully, his character gets a little better in the sequels, because I know I'm pretty sure his character's in like the first two sequels, I think, or maybe he's in all the sequels. I don't know, but his brother, Mike's brother, Jody, is a far more interesting and entertaining and likable character. And I think they should have focused a bit more on him, or at least made, or at least swapped their personalities around. On the gore meter from 1 to 10, we'll make something like Nosferatu, and 10 being something like Brain Dead. Phantasm is probably somewhere about a 3. It really isn't that gory, surprisingly. But it has its moments of violence and blood and a little bit of gore, little bit. But overall, I had to have to say I really enjoyed the film. It's honestly not the best horror film from the 70s. Maybe it would make my top 10. Maybe, but then again, I haven't seen a ton of horror films from the 70s, as many as I have seen from the 80s. So, it's kind of hard not to break my top 10 when I've only seen about 30 horror films from the 70s, and then, like, hundreds of horror films from the 80s. So, it's kind of hard to, it's not hard to do that. I'm sure that for the time the film was extremely groundbreaking, and I can definitely tell. Like I've read around that this film heavily inspired stuff like Nightmare on Elm Street and the TV series of Supernatural, and I can definitely see the Nightmare on Elm Street aspect with the kind of surreal, very very creepy atmosphere, and the main antagonist being very mysterious. And I could definitely see the connection with Supernatural, with it being about brothers trying to facing off against a mysterious figure who creates like zombies and stuff. And for the time, I'm sure this film was extremely groundbreaking. And while I can see some of that here, and the film is extremely original and is creative as hell, I still don't think it's a classic. Like I would definitely say it's a very good movie, and I would definitely highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. But I wouldn't say it's one of the best horror films I've ever seen. I wouldn't say it's one of the best of the 70s. I don't even think I would say it's one of the best fantasy or dark fantasy horror films I've ever seen. But all that being said, I still really, really like this movie. So I'd have to give it like an 8 or a 9 out of 10, which is a 4.5, which is a 4 or 4.5 out of 5 stars. And, I mean, that's a pretty damn good rating, honestly. It's worth checking out. It's very creative and inventive, and I think I'm definitely thinking about checking out some of the sequels, because I actually own the first sequel. It's over on this shelf I made out of boxes because I ran out of space on all my shelves. But I own the first sequel to it, so I think I might watch that soon. But overall, I really enjoy the film, and that's all I really have to say about it. Anyway, guys, this is Biscaboo. Well, you know the fucking deal. Biscaboo69 signing off. Peace.